Senior Director Michael Allen. Michael, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
What is your reaction to this devastating news from Syria? 2 American service members killed, 1 American interpreter killed as well, and 3 others wounded. Your thoughts?
Well, it's painful to hear about this occurrence, especially so close to the holidays. It's a reminder that we have troops in harm's way across the world. Here in Syria, in particular, our chief U.S. national interest is counterterrorism. Of course, President Trump in his first term really loosened the rules of engagement and went after and put his foot on the gas and took down ISIS. But ISIS is still there. It's still present in smaller numbers. And here they're sort of opportunistically seeing some U.S. troops come in, probably to work with the locals in order to completely finish off some local ISIS cells. And they took advantage of that and apparently didn't have enough security. So this is just something tragic we hear about, but it's a reminder for all of us that counterterrorism or Islamic extremism is going to be something that the United States needs to stay involved with. We need to keep our boot on their throats or they will come after us, if not in the Middle East, then here in the United States.
We understand there are about 900 U.S. troops operating in Syria, a counter-ISIS mission. And while the leadership of Syria has changed, Bashar al-Assad's been out for about a year. Obviously, there are still some remnants of the terrorist group there, correct?
That's exactly right. I mean, that's what's also interesting about what's going on in Syria now. You have a new leader who deposed al-Assad, as you've mentioned. He alighted out to Moscow when he couldn't hold control of the country anymore. You've got Iranians that are in this particular part of the world. You have other ethnic groups, some of whom are allied with us. So it is a really fractured, ungoverned part of the world. We would normally want to stay out of a place like this. It's not, generally speaking, our business to be involved in every ungoverned space. But this one in particular, because of ISIS, because it's the Middle East, because the United States has a presence and a vital national interest to make sure the Middle East remains stable, we are there and we are trying to tamp down, if not outright eradicate, ISIS. So that's why we're there. I know President Trump, though, I know he's going to take this extremely seriously. I know the U.S. troops and the Central Intelligence Agency and others are going to hunt down these particular ISIS members that might have been involved or had knowledge, and all hell will be rained down on them.
What about the strategic significance of Syria, its location in the hotbed of the Middle East?
You know, our interest, of course, is to try and maintain Israel as a healthy U.S. ally, a democracy in the Middle East, and the way where Syria is located and its proximity to Lebanon, which directly affects the security of Israel, those are our interests. As you mentioned earlier, there's sort of logistics lines that go from Iran across Iraq and into Syria, and then it filters downward into Israel, and they try to also target the United States when they're there. So its proximity in the Middle East, its centrality to the Middle East is what's important to us. It's not some out-of-the-way place. It's very important to the United States' national interests and to our allies to have a secure and stable Middle East. The President said as much in his national security strategy, which he released last week. So it's something that we have to keep our eyes on, and a reminder that the United States, generally speaking, can't pack up and go home in every region of the world. We have to stay vigilant because there are people after us because of who we are and our values.
Michael, you served at a senior level in the George W. Bush administration. What kind of conversations are taking place at the White House as far as your experience tells you?
Well, the first thing I believe would have been that the president calls together some of his national security figures to get some advice, and I'm sure he's tasked them with coming up with options as soon as possible. So I'm certain that someone like Secretary Rubio is chairing a call or a video conference right now with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Secretary of War, and of course others that are involved in the intelligence community, and they're trying to come up with a plan of action. I think it'll largely be reprisals along the lines of use of force, but there's no doubt that they're going to launch a more wholesome campaign. They are really going to go after some of these cells. We want to figure out how much do we we already know? How much did the U.S. military know? Is the intelligence community tracking at a great level of specificity here? Because if we have targets that we can prosecute, let's call it tonight or tomorrow, I think we're going to unleash upon them in a big way. The president understands ISIS. He understands al-Qaeda, of course, and 9/11, and then it sort of graduated into a great ISIS threat. So I think all of them are together now, going through options, figuring out what we can target and what we have intelligence on.
Today, of course, is the Army-Navy football game. All of those West Point cadets will one day be active duty Army. All the Navy midshipmen will one day be naval sailors or Marines. What do you expect to hear from the Commander-in-Chief later today at some point in relation to this devastating attack in Syria?
Well, I know the president in particular loves our U.S. Armed Forces. They're the best among us. I know he would have expressed the country's gratitude and reverence and thanks even before this incident, but I think this will put an extra emphasis on it. This is something that strikes us all very, very hard. Our troops are out there doing these things in dangerous places to keep, in this case, Islamic fundamentalist terrorists away from the United States, because we know that's what they fantasize about eventually, is getting out of whatever region they're in and coming to America. And I think President Trump will reflect the sentiment of the nation, that we're heartbroken for these soldiers, but that we're absolutely determined to hunt them down. It always reminds me of the way we went after Osama bin Laden and others that have killed us. We never give up, and America will hunt them down.
Great analysis from Michael Allen. More with you later, Michael. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
For more, let's bring in Hudson Institute Senior Fellow Rebecca Heinrichs. Rebecca, welcome.
Good to be here.
What is your reaction to this news out of Syria? 2 American soldiers killed, an American interpreter also killed, 3 American soldiers wounded.
My first reaction, of course, is this is awful. And my heart goes out to the family members of those service members and that interpreter who they're in a very, very dangerous country. And they're there because they believe in the United States and protecting us. They're there on an anti-ISIS mission. And they're there to help facilitate a new Syrian government so that Syria can be a partner with the United States in our shared interests in countering Islamist extremists. And so to have these individuals be victims of an ambush is what it looks like. We're still hearing some information about what it might have been. But Mike, what I'm really worried about is that this, we got to know if these individuals who committed this or this terrorist, did he know something from these Syrian officials? In other words, was this a betrayal of our new coalition partners? That is what I am very interested in understanding and getting to the bottom of.
What do you imagine the response will be from the Commander-in-Chief, Rebecca, and in terms of taking action in Syria?
I think it's going to be determination. I think it's going to be probably a bit of anger. That's certainly what I'm feeling right now. Obviously, you demonstrate compassion towards those who sacrifice, but we don't have many troops in Syria right now, Mike. We have a very small military footprint of very brave Americans who are there conducting counterterrorism operations. And so I would expect, we've already seen a show of force of F-16 fighter jets flying over Syria, communicating that the United States still has a free hand there if we need to use it militarily. But I would expect to see President Trump, if he needs to, identify any cells that we know are terrorist cells that are there, eliminate them, and show that if we're going to have troops in there operating, we got to be able to understand sort of where these other terrorist cells are, and we have to be able to trust our coalition partners if we're going to be relying more on them and putting some trust in them with the best of us, Mike, the best Americans who are going in there on behalf of the American people.
Great analysis from Rebecca Heinrichs, Michael Allen. More with them. We will continue to monitor the breaking news out of Syria. Obviously, devastating news today. 2 American soldiers killed, 1 American interpreter also killed, 3 American soldiers wounded. Please stay with us.
Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain podcast for full episodes right now.